Good everyone. Thank you for coming into this workshop for junior football. The focus is here is around junior footballers and the lifelong journey in this sport. So the outline of the sessions today is around why kids play, the reality of football for juniors, and providing opportunities for success. So the biggest thing is we're looking at is providing positive experiences for junior players in our region so that they can reach senior football and the lifelong desires at all levels of those games. And the journey of this begins with junior football.
Cool. So stepping into the concept of why do kids play football? And it's a question that we should ask ourselves, because at the end of the day, who's out there playing? It's the kids. So if we look through some of the research that's been done at Simon Walters, by Simon Walters at Auckland University of Technology, you can see on the screen there the main 5 reasons. Kids actually play to have fun. They play to be with their mates, learn new skills, be fit and healthy, and have a sense of fair play. And that number 1 reason is probably obvious. We hear it a lot. In fact, it's the most common answer, fun and enjoyment, from the surveys that we've done. But there is also a heap of other reasons as well why they play. And that's important to consider, as every kid is different and their motivational needs might be a little bit different. But obviously fun and enjoyment is the common thread. And just to look a little bit deeper into what fun actually means in football, there's a whole raft of reasons around what that could actually look like. Obviously scoring goals is a big one, but also just actually playing the game and performing the core skills, tackling and kicking the ball. They make up the majority of what fun actually is. So a lot of it is about actually letting the kids play, which makes sense and is something important for us to remember when the kids are playing. Important to recognize as well that winning is important, should be recognized, but it's not the be all and end all. It's kids actually enjoy winning, but at the end of the day, it's not all about the result. Kids at the end of the day just want to score goals, and I don't think the result matters to them in the long run. If you ask them a couple of hours after the game, I don't think they'll remember, and certainly not in the days to follow. So important for us to remember as adults and adult influences around the game. And in terms of the common myth, there's a common myth around all sports and in particular football as well, that kids need to win as many games as possible. And the common myth that we believe that if they are a 9-year-old champion, that they'll go on to be a champion when they're older. But research done, certainly overseas, has highlighted that there's actually a really low correlation between success at a junior age and success at a higher age, at a senior age. So there's really no need to put the emphasis on winning, because that literally has no effect on how kids perform at an older age. So it should just really be about fun and enjoyment and getting as much out of the game as possible for the kids. And if we think about why kids actually stop playing, well, first and foremost, it's not fun anymore. So somewhere along the lines, our attitudes change and the kids stop having fun. And the question to ask ourselves is, why does it stop being fun? And we can sort of certainly look in more detail around that. But it's a question to ask ourselves. And in terms of why it's not being fun, well, kids sort of have lost the ownership of the experience. And that's a key motivational pillar in regards to being fun. How do we make sure kids have ownership of the experience, and how do we just let them play and let them lead the games? In terms of another reason why they sort of get afraid to make mistakes, so that this is certainly where winning culture becomes incentivized, and then sort of mistakes are frowned upon. So we need to make sure we create an environment where mistakes are not only encouraged but allowed, and so they do want to keep playing. In terms of how we learn, the kids that are more sort of free in their approach to play, they actually become more creative. The kids that play on the street with no rules, they're genuinely more creative because they do have ownership. They're not afraid to make mistakes, and it's generally fun for them because they're in control. So can we create, or can we take some of these principles into our sessions and the way we behave on the sideline as well? In regards to just touching on a little bit of the formats of how we can play the game, obviously the traditional concept of tournaments certainly leads to the fact that it might not be fun for kids because only the best kids go. There's certainly a focus on winning, and winning is celebrated. And there's certainly an adult concept being introduced in terms of the format. But if we take a shift towards the festival approach, which we've slowly introduced, it's certainly not centered around winning. There is a big focus on fun and development, and an opportunity for all kids, regardless of their ability, to participate. And certainly the festivals have had a lot of success, certainly in recent years, and I'm sure they will continue to do the same.
Perfect. And I'll take over here from Scotty. So providing opportunity for success for our junior players. And one thing we noticed in the data in terms of players playing club football is that from the ages of about 10 and 11 nationally, we have a decline in membership and people participating in football. And as you can see, from the age of 11 onwards, there's a steady decline. And then from 13 to 14, we have a big drop-off. And that big drop-off could be related to players going to secondary school football where the data isn't captured, but it still shows that we are losing members from the game. And this all stems from junior football, where we haven't been able to facilitate a lifelong desire of the game. So how can we provide opportunity to keep children in the game for longer? Well, if you think about these two players here, they're both 8 years old and they're both born on the same day. And generally the question is, and this usually happens when we run trials in pre-season, is, well, who is the better player? If we look at them both and we both know they're both born on the same day, well, we don't actually know. We don't know who the better player is. But with a little bit of context here, the player on the left, Jimmy, they've been playing in the backyard with their brother since the age of 5, so they've got 3 years of playing experience. Whereas the player on the right there, Jess, she's only just started playing at school and she's just joined in at lunchtime. So the player on the right has less playing history than the player on the left. And if we're asked the question, well, who is the better player? We would more often than not say that Jimmy on the left is the better player, because what we see is 3 years of history versus someone that's just started to play the game. And the question we try to ask in trials is, well, who has the most potential? Well, unfortunately, we can't see potential. And it's a question that we can't really answer, especially in junior football. And what we might see is actually we perceive the player on the left to have more potential because their glass is more full. Whereas the player on the right, they may have more potential because they've got a bigger glass. But what we see now is it's not as full. And ultimately, we end up selecting the player on the left based on what we see, thinking that is their potential, that they actually have more room to fill in their glass, where actually their glass might be smaller. So the question is, well, how do we cater for players and be able to provide opportunity for them all to be successful? Another thing we think about is that in terms of player history is, if you look on the left here, you've got two graphs and it's looking at players on their birthday, when they're born in the year. So Q1 is players born in January, February, March, whereas Q4 would be players that are born in October, November, December. So the year split across in 4 quarters. And then on the right here, same graph, and it looks a little bit more evenly distributed. What we noticed is actually on the left here is players that are graded. So we typically end up selecting from trials players that are born earlier in the year versus players born later in the year for the so-called A teams. Whereas on the right, when we don't select and grade, well, there's an even distribution of players. And if you think about a child, say at the age of 10, and they're born in January, compared to a child born in December of the same age year, there could be a whole year's worth of age difference between those two players and a whole year worth of development. So what we actually see in front of us is a player that's born in January that we perceive to be better, but that's only because they've had more playing experience than the person born at the end of the year. So we end up selecting that player, and we think that player has more potential. And this is what we call the iceberg effect. So essentially, on the top is what we see now, which is the potential, the performance of the player, but actually below the water is their potential, and we can't really see what the potential of a player is. So the role of a coach, a director of football, is not to select what's in front of them, but actually have the patience and the long-term view to actually allow children to fulfill their potential. And that's the whole purpose of junior football. If we look at this, the FIFA double pyramid here, what we're saying is that players 12 and under, they're all in the grassroots, or they're all community players. So there's no such thing as talent football below the age of 12. And then what we see is that as they get older, from youth football to seniors, is that there becomes a distinction between talent and community. But it doesn't mean that if we go down the left-hand side of the pyramid that we can't jump into the talent side, because we all know that players will develop at different rates. And if we all think about players that we've worked with in the past, or players that we know that may have been, I guess, a late developer that have been able to fulfill their potential a lot later in life, they end up jumping across into the right-hand side. And football and sport in general is full of stories like this in what we call the late developers. And the issue becomes is that, well, if you're thinking about selecting one A team, well, at under 9, we have 10 players. At under 12, if you're selecting one player, is that, well, we've got to find 2 more players to fulfill that team. When they go to youth football, well, it's 16. And the question is, well, where are those additional 2 or 4 players coming from if we're selecting one team? And what we notice is that, well, if you select one A team from the ages of 9, 10, 11, and 12 in junior football, as well, actually you're narrowing the base of your pyramid, and you're actually diminishing the chances of not just the players, but your club developing players for long-term success and allowing players to fulfill their full potential. So the next question is, well, why do we want children to sample other sports, and why is playing other sports a good thing? Well, the research shows that they're able to develop a more diverse range of skills. It helps them develop more motivation, more self-involvement, but also there's transfer across sports in terms of what they learn. Some research done in the US on Olympic athletes shows that actually when they're younger, they try a wide range of sports and they're able to sample and try new things. But when they get older, they might select a single sport that they want to specialize in a little bit later. And I'm talking in their later youth years, but they might have another sport that they continue to play because they just love and enjoy it. And a quote out of Manchester United is that, well, they found that players actually had a background in gymnastics were able to move in a different way compared to players that had specialized in football as well. And I'm not saying that every child should now go do gymnastics, but what I'm saying is that we should allow children to try other sports. Now, if you think about a player that plays netball, they'll learn really good hand-eye coordination skills. And if the player was to play football, well, they'll get good foot-eye coordination skills. And now they're getting a holistic development from multiple sports. The other really good thing about playing other sports is that it gives players an opportunity to take a rest from football or futsal, and they can try something else so they don't burn out. Now, imagine doing the same thing for 52 weeks of the year. It can become very boring. It can become quite, I guess, for the player itself, they can lead to more injuries as well because they're doing the same things, the same movement patterns. Whereas if they try something else, well, they're using their whole body now. So what we're saying is that, well, just because they look like adults doesn't mean they are adults. So they're just miniature, and they're not miniature adults. So we need to let and provide opportunity for children that meet the needs of children. And we can't treat them like adults. So what we're saying is make it fun, make it enjoyable, let them try new sports. And the big thing is, the big focus as adults working in junior football is that we need to meet the why of children. So make sure it's fun, because it's the #1 reason they play football. make sure they get heaps of opportunities to shoot at goal, and you rotate positions so everyone has a chance to play as an attacker or a goalkeeper or a defender, but always providing that opportunity and making sure it's fun for them. That's the number one reason, and that's the reason why we can capture more children and keep them in football for longer.
Yeah, thanks Shane and Scott for that. Appreciate it. From an NRF perspective, we are committed to the game day experience for juniors and junior football. And some of the resources available are, one, the retreating line, which is a nationwide incentive, incentivizing playing out from the back, and ensuring kids get to play with the ball rather than just a long ball style of football. Additionally, Northern Region Football has introduced a game day challenge point document, which is in place to protect the game day experience of both teams. What we find is sometimes there is lopsided abilities between the two teams, and this document is in place so that coaches can actively manage that situation to ensure both teams are having fun. So there's ways within that document that coaches can basically implement things to ensure that does happen. And lastly is the fluid grading system that we run as a federation, which allows us to move teams up and down divisions where required, so that teams are playing at that active challenge point most suitable for them. So more information on the three of those documents, the retreating line, fluid grading, and the match day challenge point document, can all be found below. Please follow these links. Thank you all for your time. Appreciate listening in.